Happy for us to kick off?
Right, good afternoon everyone. Welcome to the Fees and Charges Review Workshop of the 21st of August 2025. It's a continuation of the workshop, so we won't go through all the formalities. We'll carry those across, and I'm happy to hand over to staff. Christine will give us an introduction, and then we'll go through a presentation. Thank you.
Yes, so we had a previous session with elected members where we worked through just fees and charges review, gave you some context setting. It was a decision that you made through the annual plan to review fees and charges as part of the 26-27 annual plan process. So this session today is to work through the activity areas of council. Staff have done an assessment on where they think there are the best opportunities to look at fees and charges. So we're presenting that for a discussion, and the intention is that then that would come back to a formal decision of council as to which areas you're actually going to pursue, and then a work program would roll out where we look at individual activities. So the idea of today is not to drill into specific activities other than to come to a conversation and a preliminary view on which ones you want to focus on and look at through this review. And then we can bring that back for approval. So that's what we'd like to do. Is we've got it grouped by group of council activities, work through each group. So the staff will just talk through one whole group, and we'll wait. That's right. Good. So we'll work through it group by group. So if you allow the staff just to work through the whole group, they'll focus most of our time within each group on those areas where we think there's the highest opportunity. Probably skim relatively quickly over the lows. We're just checking in with you that you're comfortable that we've got that right. So we'll move group by group, and then we'll open at the end of each group for a conversation and a bit of direction, either confirmation, any questions, and then we'll move through to the next one if you're comfortable. So I'll just hand over to the team.
Kia ora. Just a couple of finance framing things. We've prepared the financial data that's in there in the little table for each activity based on the funding needs analysis, the way that that's presented in the planning documents, LTP. And then we've broken them down, some of them spaces and places and stuff like that, down into cemeteries, you know, a bit more detail. And this is with the aim of giving you an overview where each activity sits in terms of user fees versus rates. And just to note too that every year during the planning process, every activity actually has a really, they review the past performance and known future effects and adjust their budgets accordingly. And that's it from me. Over to...
Cool. So, like Christine and Emma have said, we have broken them down. So we'll have a discussion, I think, at each of the four parts. I think we're doing infrastructure and spaces and places. Sorry. Support services as well. So we'll start off with infrastructure. And the first up is airport. So for the airport, this includes landing charges, car park and taxi fees. And so the airport-related fees and charges are proposed as a low priority for review because most revenue streams have either recently been adjusted, externally regulated or already operating under commercial agreements. Car parking fees were significantly increased recently, and the team is still assessing the impact of this. As you can see on the screen, the airport is expected to receive 19 million in revenue from user fees and charges, with majority of this coming from our commercial agreement with Air New Zealand, but this is reviewed annually outside of this user fees and charges process. From discussions with the airport team, there are no known gaps in charging and no immediate opportunities for meaningful change. For sustainability and waste,
let's just do all of the infrastructure ones together and then we'll come back to it.
For sustainability and waste, we've also proposed that this be a low priority. There are only minor issues and opportunities that have been identified, including the opportunity to potentially include illegal dumping cost recovery fees. Next is stormwater, also a low priority for us. While the stormwater charges are currently minimal, as you can see up on the screen, there could be an opportunity to recover costs associated with development-related queries and pollution events such as concrete cleanups. However, these incidents only happen around 10 times a year and can cost council $1,000 to $2,000 per event. So the potential cost recovery in this is fairly low. It should also be noted that a review of the stormwater is being done through the local Water Done Well workstream. For wastewater, however, though, we have recommended that this be a high priority for within this review, specifically the trade waste area. This is because we are currently reviewing the trade waste bylaw, which is looking to make changes to enable introducing fees for administration, site visits and monitoring, but also looking at charging more businesses, which could increase our cost recovery. For example, restaurants and car washes. For water supply, general water use charges are reviewed annually as part of a standard process outside of this review, and this is based off a volumetric model that we have. So no additional issues or opportunities have been identified at this time. Still within infrastructure, we've got transportation. This includes both parking, road reserve occupation, which is corridor access requests, and temporary leasing of road space. All of these we have prioritised as a low priority. We have made changes recently in the parking space, which staff will continue to monitor throughout this year ahead of another review for the LTP year. Within road reserve occupation, there is an opportunity to introduce overweight vehicle permits, which other councils around the country are doing, which at your request we could look into further. So that's all for the infrastructure area. So I'll just pass over to you to hear any of your comments.
The airport, I sort of hear anecdotally that some of the leases there are sort of below market and really good value. Who assesses what the actual fair market rate would be? Is it the airport via whoever they use to look at it, or is it our property team that probably would have a better handle on market rates? And also a second question on the airport is the landing charges for, say, in New Zealand and so forth. Is that compared to other airports, and are we at the right place?
So I don't know the answer to your question in exact detail, but Ray is very much on top of all that leasing stuff. He's been doing it for quite a long time, so we can contact Ray and bring that information back as far as how he goes about that. The second part of the question was about commercial landing. Yeah, and that's very much a negotiation every 5 years, I think it is, with Air New Zealand Direct, and all the airport managers and owners around the country talk as far as what is fair rate. Obviously, Air New Zealand knows what the rates are everywhere else as well, and it gets quite commercial, should we say.
Councillor Crowther.
Yeah, two things. One is parking. I guess I'm just wanting to understand why it's low priority when we need to raise so much more funding from that activity. And if we don't intend, I'm not saying I have a view on it, but to me we should be transparent, go through the whole process of looking at that. Do we still want to get the 46 million? If we don't, then maybe we keep it low priority. But if we do, we have to make big changes at some point, and it seems it'd be a good time to look at it as part of this. I'm just wondering if you have any feedback. Then I have another point.
So being selfish, the initial thinking through this project was that parking has got its own work stream and you're well involved with them, and that we won't sort of step on toes and roll across the top. If you want to have a further look at parking, then we can have a further look at parking.
I think it needs to be in this context, because in the parking context, like basically we have three contexts. We have the overall public transport type context where there's pressure to put it up, the pricing, for a particular purpose. Then we have another context which is with the funding of, CBD investments, etc. And so there's upwards pressure on it there. And then we have a context around parking itself, which is what we've been talking about, and that's completely separated conversation from those other two. And the pressure there is always to put the parking prices down. So to me, it's better to join it all up, have one integrated conversation involving public transport, involving the CBD development, and involving the actual reality of parking and the public's point of view, and how much they want to fund from general rates, how much from targeted rates to the CBD, and how much from parking. To me, if this is not the right forum to do that, it'd be good to create that as a completely separate work stream, but one that's fully integrated in the same way that the user fees and charges discussions are, would be my view. The other question I had was, as some people in the room know, I've consistently pushed for more user fees in waste, and I guess I'm just still, I haven't seen the evidence. I've heard this sort of, I've heard that what for me is probably just talk that we can't implement user fees for landfill waste collection at curbside, but I'd like to really flesh that out, and this seems, again, a perfect opportunity to do that, because it seems something, when you have a public bad, you typically want to put in user fees and charges. What we're doing is we're not doing it in that area, but we're putting user fees and charges in areas that are public good, such as, borrowing fiction library books, which is I would have thought a good thing for our community, but they pay fees. But then when they throw out a whole lot of rubbish, they pay it through a set rate, and they don't get penalised for throwing it out more.
Councillor Baker.
Kia ora, tēnā koutou. Thanks for the report. Just a bit more, wanting a bit more understanding around the trade waste and that being a high priority for us. If I'm understanding what we mean by trade waste, do we know the rough percentage of our commercial and industrial businesses that would be impacted by a change in the fee and charges?
From my understanding, and I'm not a subject matter expert in trade waste, unfortunately, but that type of information is what we would provide you in our next workshop if this was a high priority for you.
Yeah, it is. I will. Gotcha.
I think there's much merit. So and then what will happen is the subject matter experts will bring information papers, provide this current situation, provide you information on what the opportunities would look like and the impacts. So we're just trying to screen out. Otherwise, we could work across all of them and do a whole lot of work that's of no value if you're not interested in pursuing them. Yeah. So that's all today is trying to do.
Yeah. Sorry. Just a direction from staff. I just want to drill into, we talked about transport just before. So is that just trying to understand, like at the moment there's charging in transportation. We can change the charges quite easily, through whatever process. But is this around sort of fundamental change in the way we charge, or the more the mechanics, or is it actually saying which we want to charge more for parking or less for public transport?
It can be both.
Okay.
Yeah. So both the quantum of the charge, how and when you charge, whether you have differential charging for different types of benefits, all of those things are matters that you could consider through a review of this nature, as long as it sits within a statutory framework. So obviously, road use charge is currently really heading in that direction. Well, that will come later, but other than that, yeah.
Thanks for that clarification. Sorry, Councillor Roseboom.
Yeah, definitely in support of the trade waste being high, especially if it's charging fees to ensure consent monitoring, or where they have a breach of a consent, the continuation for the time of monitoring to make sure they're back on course again. Definitely interested in focusing on those two areas around special oil spills, acid spills, also carry on, and site contamination. So if the company moves or changes site, that the site's left how they found it and they don't leave all their spills and grills in the ground, so they clean up. So all that kind of monitoring, definitely want to dig a bit deeper into that area.
Cool. We'll keep going.
Cool, so we can move now into the spaces and places area. So first we have venues and events, which we have proposed to be a low priority, just because there's no known issues or opportunities. This area has very minimal fees within it. Then we have Bay venues. So it's been agreed within the enduring statement of expectations that we have with Bay venues that we will undertake a review of user fees every 3 years, which is aligned with the LTP process. So in the intervening annual plan years, such as this year, fees will be adjusted by CPI. So as such, this year we only intend to make CPI adjustments and then begin a more comprehensive review in the next year of the long-term plan. So the historic village. So the historic village fees were comprehensively reviewed as part of the last long-term plan process, and the team there continues to monitor the impact of those charges on the usage and revenue. So therefore, we're recommending that it is a low priority and could be reviewed within the next LTP cycle. For libraries, we're recommending a review as high and to be undertaken because of the upcoming opening of the Te Manawa Taki o Te Papa Library in 2026. This will introduce revenue potential through room hire and commercial use of this new space. There is an opportunity to reassess the balance between accessibility and cost recovery for the library. The council does not currently charge for the library bus service or programs and events run by the library staff, which see around 35,000 participants annually. For Bay Court, the council currently provides a 50% discount for community groups that use Bay Court, which has been long-standing. There is a possibility to review this, but we will need to be cautious to ensure pricing remains competitive and accessible to users. Bay Court is already at the upper end of theatre hire fees nationally, and further increases risk pricing the venue out of market, especially when there is a new theatre under construction currently in Hamilton. There is an opportunity to also review the fees at the cargo shed. So there has been a slight change with cemetery since this was sent to you. Staff are now proposing that we do a review of the cemeteries fees given the ongoing conversations with the community and funeral directors from the most recent review. The beach holiday park fees are considered a low priority for this review due to their alignment with sector benchmarks and the absence of any known issues or inefficiencies. Staff completed a comparison with similar councils that indicated our fees are at the higher end of the market rates, and as such, staff do not recommend allocating further review effort in this area. So within this spaces and places activity, there's parks, recreation and use of council land. Staff are recommending a review for both to ensure the right balance between cost recovery and community accessibility. A review would allow council to assess whether current fees reflect the true cost of service delivery that align with the broader strategic goals for the community. Then we have the marine facilities. This is recommended as a low priority due to no known issues or opportunities with the current fees. However, boat ramp parking could be rediscussed and reintroduced within this area for additional cost recovery. So that is the Spaces and Places group. I'll open up to the floor again.
Councillor Crowther.
I'm not opposed to doing a review on anything, but I really worry when I see what's written for Bay Court. I'm wondering, are we going to do this with a bit of a preconceived idea of trying to increase revenue, or will it be looking also at reducing revenue from user fees there, because the community discount, as it says there, it's already above market from many people's views anyway, and the community discount doesn't make it accessible to our community. There's a major barrier there. And with the facilities opening in the library, I kind of think it'd be nice to integrate those two and look at what community facilities are there. But I just kind of, I'd be much more comfortable if we didn't talk about the community discount. Maybe, there's nothing that indicates it could rise, because I think personally it needs to go in the opposite direction, if anything.
So those are the sort of issues which can come out through a review. As staff, we are guided by the words that you put into the annual plan document, which was to undertake the user fees and charges with a view to reducing the reliance on rates. So the conversations we're having around the organisation are increase user fees and charges, reduce rates, but clearly the conversations around this table can take any turn that you want to.
Could I just pick up on that? So some of these spaces and places aren't paying rates. Some of our community facilities, I think we received some information from Jim a little while ago. So will that form part of the review of user fees, whether they're currently paying rates to Tauranga Council?
It could do. I mean, the conversation around user fees is about users as opposed to how the activity is sort of set up like that, but I mean, we can certainly bring that in. I don't think it's a major element of the funding of the activities, but we could have that conversation, particularly if there were specifics which you were interested in as a group.
Sorry, just going back to the very first one, venues and events. A couple of questions. Prior year variance, 574%, is that correct, or is that, do we know why that is?
Yeah, just remembering that proportionally, the proportion's thrown out because their budget and their actuals are so very tiny, or their budget's so very tiny. So you're only looking at between 5 and 20,000.
So what sort of stuff does that include? Like I'm thinking.
So what we budget for is the roadside signs, digital roadside signs for advertising events. That's kind of the only thing that we budget for, but the other stuff is other signage that might go up if there's TCC staff that are required to support the event. We charge for that as well. So yeah, there's a variety of little bits and pieces everywhere.
So I'm thinking outdoor events, things like One Love, for a by domain usage. Is that in here, or is that somewhere else?
I haven't got the detail on that or how that's charged for.
Okay, just seems like a very small amount.
Oh, okay. Yep. So it sounds like it's budgeted for in spaces and places rather than in venues and events.
Councillor Crowther.
I'm just, given your answer to the previous question, when I read for spaces and places, the general spaces and places area, the high priority for parks and recreation and use of council land, and looking back to the consultation undertaken with the community just a year or so ago, then would you rank that as high priority if it wasn't for what you maybe perceive as sort of pressure from us to kind of find areas to do that? Because I guess framing out my question, 99% is rates reliance. We've had a massive conversation in the city which has really thoroughly annoyed a lot of people and we seem to be going back to revisit it very quickly, not in an LTP context. And I'm just thinking, is that a recommendation because you think it is a good time to do it? Or is it a recommendation because you're feeling a bit pressured and you think, well, that's better than having it on some other issues?
So no, it's not a case of better than others because of that. It's following the direction that you're looking to increase user fees and charges, or to review user fees and charges with the opportunity to reduce reliance on rates. Holly used the phrase opportunity in her intro. There's a big opportunity in spaces and places, whether as a council you choose to take those opportunities or not, it's entirely up to you. It is about balancing accessibility and raising funds, and these are big numbers in this part of the world. So
I think
it
the
all
other
comes
point
together.
is when you made the decision, when you were relatively new around boat ramps and you took those fees off, your position there was actually you wanted to look at all of these type of recreational facilities in a more comprehensive manner, and that's where this came from. So it is absolutely the direction that you've given us. What you choose to do within that is your political call, really, but the clear direction you've given us on a couple of occasions now is you want to look at this comprehensively, just to make sure that it's a complete picture and that it is fair and equitable from your perspective.
My comment to my colleagues would be, it'd be good for us to think very carefully and then make that decision wisely in the upcoming meeting, and for staff maybe to frame it up as, do you still wish to do that in these areas, as opposed to given that you want to do it in these areas? Because it's possibly just a personal view, but I know at the time I sort of thought I would not support going out to the public outside an LTP to do something so comprehensive on this when it took so much staff time and resource and had strong feedback from the community that I think it's almost like we're ignoring the fact that the council existed before we arrived. Just a personal view, but I'd just urge my colleagues to think this through a bit.
Yeah, Councillor Roseberry and then Councillor Correa.
Yeah, I definitely support the Spaces and Places fees review, but it's more about how we arrive at it. What's the value of the asset? What's the cost to maintain the asset and replace the asset? And what each sport pays in a fee for that asset across all the sports facilities, so the public get a better understanding of how we arrive at our price. That will feed into the LTP, as Councillor Cowther has said. It's so we understand how a fee for a particular sports team or club is arrived at, and how they pay and support the asset that they use for their sport. That's the Councillor Shaw and I were trying to get at, how we actually arrive at a fee for a club for the use of a public facility, relevant to the cost of replacing that facility or maintaining it.
Yeah, Councillor Correa.
Thank you, Christine, around the comprehensive nature of the review. And I remember after our sort of knee-jerk boat ramp decision, a guy that's a member of the Mount Tennis Club confronted me saying, well, how could you, our fees went up so much, over that last review and blah, blah, blah. So that's why we need to get this right. And so, in terms of a comprehensive review, we could obviously annoy a few members of the community entering into that, but if we go into it with an open mind and we're just, looking at options, it might be helpful, but I certainly agree with Councillor Crowther that this could create an undue amount of controversy and angst amongst the community, just even talking about it, considering there was quite a large increase in the last review done by the commissioners. So,
yeah, I guess though this is what we sort of discussed. It's around equity, and yes, there was a large review, but then there was a whole lot of fees that were just cancelled. So we've got an opportunity in the city. You've got basketball, netball, tennis. They're all paying, while rugby, soccer, they're not paying. So I think that's the sort of disconnect, and that's why we need to get this right. We need to take a stance one way or the other. I think, again, most of the pushback that I saw in that previous review was not actually about paying. It was you're pricing us out of sport, or there's a lot of sort of. But if that's where we've got to get that information, we've got to explain the situation and say this is a fair, because at the moment we've got what we heard about boat ramps. Again, I think the general view wasn't that we actually mind about paying for boat ramps. It was actually, why should we be paying for boat ramps when you can use park for free, or whatever it's an equity thing. So I think we do need to look at it all, and obviously that is a political call at the end of the day. Do we continue to keep it unfair that some people pay and some people don't, or do we have a a fairer system across the city, but that's our decision to make. But very much encourage looking at it and trying to come up with a fair way to do it, so everyone feels like they're not being disadvantaged, I guess. But I think what we've got right now is actually very inequitable, and that's where we get most of the pushback. Is if we're not going to charge for fields, why should we charge for indoor courts? For argument's sake, I'm not sure why basketball have to pay when rugby don't. So I think that's probably where this needs to go.
I think it's around cost of service, though, relative. Basketball, the cost of service is far higher than a field.
So let's look at it and let's explain that to people, or let's make a decision on the numbers rather than at the moment we're just sort of guessing.
Can I just clarify with staff? Are there field users, sports clubs, etc., who pay nothing for the use of those facilities? Because I understood that was part of what was agreed, was that they would be paying for it.
We'd bring the relevant key staff. My understanding is that at different levels there is fees, but at junior levels there's not. But I'm not the expert, and I wouldn't say that that's 100%. And is it across all types of use of sports fields? Because they're used for a whole variety of things, not just organised sport. So they'd be all things, if you had said, yep, you want to have a look at it, that would all come back with the relevant information for you to make a call on.
And in light of that, I guess I just reiterate, it still seems to make a lot of sense to do it in an LTP context. So if it could be done in an LTP type of way, as opposed to just ad hoc areas that we seem to be talking about, because I hear Councillor Russell-Boom and I hear the Mayor, but to me it seems like there's maybe just certain elected members need more information, but that doesn't have to mean you do a whole public consultation. And if we're doing it, I think we need to do it very comprehensively and look at not just the difference between a rugby field and a basketball court, but between a whole bunch of other things, which implies an LTP type conversation, because that's the argument, as you well know as staff, that came back from the community. It wasn't inequity between sports facilities, it was inequities across the city on art galleries and all sorts of things, some of which are through CCOs, I realise, but we have to have that conversation, in my view, if we're going to have the conversation around opening up this can of worms.
So that at the end of the day is an elected member call. So the direction that you've given us to date is that you wanted to do it as part of the annual plan. We're suggesting that there are some areas where it makes sense. If you wanted to do a comprehensive, you just say to us, no, we're treating them all as high and we want to do the lot. That's all in your hands.
Thank you, Councillor Crowther. From the start, I was a bit reluctant to enter into doing a half-pie job during the annual plan process, as I would have thought a comprehensive review would be more of a long-term plan initiative. So, I'm certainly in support of that, and doing the job and doing it properly through a more, I'll use that word, robust process, because we don't want to leave anybody out here, because it creates angst in the community. But if the community has the bigger picture for those who are interested in front of them, and to help them understand that we will need to move some fees, they would therefore, have that background information to allow a certain degree of acceptance. But in saying that, people are being rated very highly, and they'll see any increase in user fees as just another tax, and they'll say to us, well, why don't you just reduce your spending? And that's the trouble when we're going through this process at a time when people are financially constrained in terms of the overall cost, and it's just another cost to them if we do look at raising some of them. So yes, personally I'd prefer to defer this to the long-term plan and do it properly, and we get a better idea of where we're heading into the longer term, and where the emphasis may be or may not be to really focus in on user fees. That's just my thinking at this time.
My view would be that we need to undertake a comprehensive review of user fees and charges as part of the next annual plan, in lieu of a long-term plan discussion, because my personal view would be we do the long-term plan next year, but I don't detect any majority view around the table to push for that. So as somebody who is not content always being in the minority, I think that we have clearly signalled that we need to take the pressure off the core rates bill, and user fees and charges are a way to do that, accepting what Councillor Kurak has said around the feedback that we will receive around, well, you need to actually do things more efficiently in-house at Tauranga City Council. But I think that it's time to review this altogether sooner rather than later, and so I do support it as part of the next annual plan.
Yeah, well, I think that's good direction. I think, you know, what I'm very much hearing, and I support that as well, around comprehensive, I think is the word we've heard, that's what we did ask for going into this, is actually we want to look at the comprehensive, and we sort of didn't do it as part of the annual plan this year because it was too big a piece of work, but I think that's what we've now got the opportunity to do. I think actually separating it from the long-term plan is actually quite a good thing, because it'll mean that we have some space in the long-term plan to talk about this will be a big, you know, a big sort of noise around this, and we need to get that view from our community. We did ask the question this year around, you know, how we want it to fund it, but we need to now go out and say, well, these are your options. You know, do you still want to pay for everything through rates, or, you know, are we actually going in this direction? Because we need to settle this once and for all, whether we're either paying for it through rates or we're paying, you know, a portion through user fees. So I think it would be a good opportunity, but I think we do go in with our, you know, our minds open as to, you know, listening to that feedback and figuring out what our people actually want. So, yeah, I think we can keep going through, but I think we'd like to see as comprehensive as we can, you know, to look at all this and, you know, together. Councillor Baker, you.
Yeah, I support the general steering direction of Steve and Mahi. And I probably think a lessons learnt approach, looking at how things unfolded with the annual plan and the waters discussion, it is a good thing to separate such a big thing like user fees and charges to the discussion that we'll have with the long-term plan, so we can really focus in on that. And actually probably the safest course of action is to do a real comprehensive deep dive into the whole spectrum of that, so we're not running any risks or you know, having to relitigate or relook at stuff on the fly and all those sorts of things, but kind of looking at what you guys have already proposed in terms of the high priority areas. I do see the rationale and why those are particular areas of focus. If we look at trade waste as an example for the costs associated to that, you know, its rates reliance is 92% of its total costs. So I can see, and a lot of those high priority areas, you know, are rate reliant quite significantly. So, and there's a way to kind of address a bit of an equity issue there. But in terms of doing this well, doing it once, which is the messages that we've been sending since boat charge fees and whatnot, yeah, let's just do a real deep dive. Let's just do a real good deep dive. I think that'll be really, really beneficial.
Councillor Kurak.
I'm just thinking that during the long-term plan process, we'll have to start talking about stuff like arts and heritage, given the investment down there. So could we perhaps in this process signal that, hey, gives the community some comfort in those that at the boat ramp charge discussion during the campaign. People say, well, what about, going into the art gallery, or what about going into the museum, or the libraries? So would that be a process that could be sort of signalling something and then discussing it in the long-term plan once we've got a better handle on Te Manawataki in terms of cost recovery there, because it's a big chunk. I think what's the number John Robson alluded to at the Patmore ratepayers is a figure of like $26 million additional OPEX. And so it's significant, and then the public would expect that we do include that in the discussion at some point. It's probably better earlier, that's my sort of view. How could that be accommodated within this comprehensive review that we're doing within the annual plan, given that it doesn't include those activities in Te Manawataki?
So yeah, you could definitely flag that. You've actually got on the public record a very comprehensive business case, which has got assumptions about revenue and how that's built up, and you could tear that apart and say we either agree with it or we want to go more aggressive or less aggressive. Absolutely, you could be part of this conversation.
I noted it wasn't in the slideshow. Was that because it basically is something that will be a long-term plan matter? It doesn't exist yet, but...
So at the moment it's been left out because it is the CCO conversation. We've in the art gallery, there is no museum at the moment, so we're working off the current information. But if you wanted to go and forward proof that, then we can work off the business case. We've got a rough idea of, there's business case numbers around costs and revenues. Clearly, we'll have a better handle on that 3 years after it opens, but we can work on the information we've got at the moment. The art gallery conversation, that's been well traversed by many councils over the years as far as the responsibility there, and that comes through your statement of expectations, and then the statement of intent as to what their cost recovery is. But you can flag, your council, you can flag what you want to flag.
The argument always is on access. For some reason, people don't like paying to go into a facility like the art gallery. But I suppose we could, talk about changing that sort of expectation, because for people to value something, it's always an expectation that they express that value that they're getting via a commitment to pay towards it rather than the ratepayer. But I think the art gallery does have some appetite in terms of charging. I'm not sure where that is in terms of just visitors to the community or locals, but I'd certainly like that to be included in this discussion, given it is there, and we'll be reopening sometime in November, I think.
Councillor Crowther.
Yeah, I'd support Councillor Kurak as direction to staff that. To me, if we're going to do what the Mayor and Councillor Morris have suggested and sort of effectively do the LTP user fees and charges review a year early, then I think it should be included, because I don't think we want to push another council to do another out-of-context review of user fees and charges a couple of years later, or a year later potentially. So to me, there's that issue. There's also this council has signalled quite strongly, and again, I personally haven't got my head into this, but I know a number of my colleagues have said they want our little brother area, Western Bay, that those residents to pay more towards our facilities. That's going to be a driver, I would imagine. And then we've got people from out of town, and this will be the single biggest draw card of people going to council facilities by far, based on the projected numbers. So all that stuff needs to be factored in, and we have the information. We don't have reality, of course, but we have the projections. It's highly likely that we'll need even more money, in my view, rather than less money. So it just seems a no-brainer to put it in there and have the conversation, and then we can make whatever decision we want. But otherwise, you're going to have to go and do it a year later anyway.
If I can just add to that conversation, I had my first conversation with the director of the museum yesterday in my new capacity, and on his list of top 15 issues to deal with, I think this was number 7. So it was very much on his radar, very easy to include as part of this conversation for all of the reasons that you've mentioned in terms of cost recovery, in terms of parity with what our art gallery currently does, whether that's right or wrong, and we have a different opinion. We absolutely need to explore that, and the implications for Western Bay residents, for national and international visitors, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, really on our radar and keen to have that conversation.
And I think you've had a paper before about all the issues that relate to the Western Bay area. My understanding of where we'd landed with that is that you were going to have a governance to governance discussion before we started having those sort of at a TCC level here without engaging. So we'll await direction if there's anything different from that, but that was our expectation from our previous chats that we'd had about that topic.
I think we do need to, start, we've got a problem because around ratepayers, etc., or ratepayers and residents, I think it's really important that they are effectively paying for a lot of these things, and we do need some way of being able to reduce fees for those residents, etc., or have tiered pricing. So I'm really keen to hear from staff if there's an easy way through an app or something or other that a card that we can identify them. I know, for example, the Mountain Hot Poles, there's a discount for them, and it makes a lot of sense to me. With being such a popular visitor destination, that the people that aren't supporting our city are charged more to use our facilities. So be keen to hear back from staff if there's an easy way. I hear the art gallery are proposing to charge overseas visitors a fee, but it should really be visitors because we're as residents and ratepayers of Tauranga, you should get some advantage for paying for these things already, and not having everyone else sort of freeloading off us. So yeah, I guess I'm not sure whether we want to go through every single one. I think is the direction quite clear that we sort of are quite keen to do quite a comprehensive review.
I think other than those that have been just reading through them, where there's really no point, there's a process already in place, etc. But reading through that, I basically support what's in front of me in terms of this presentation, but just ensure that we don't miss anything out. Yeah.
So reading through that, the big potential gap at the moment is bay venues. There's been a lot of talk about basketball and various bits and pieces. At the moment, that's not intended to be part of this process because through your statement of expectations and their own planning, they would intend that to be a next year conversation. So we can, if the will of the table is to pull that forward, then we'll need to talk to bay venues quite quickly. And that may well be a G2G type conversation as well, rather than staff coming along.
You've given us is broadly the lows are about right, but you want us just to run another lens over them and just check in the light of this conversation, is there anything that should be brought back in? You've asked for the arts, culture and heritage, which relates to new facilities that won't be open in the next annual plan. You want those included, so it's more comprehensive. We'll look at we'll bring something about bay venues into the report so that you can make a call about whether you want to actually start those conversations, and similarly we'll note the wider issue with Western Bay and your previous direction around that, so that it all comes together in one place. Is that pretty much captured what you've asked of us to do? That will come back to the 16th of September council meeting for direction.
Yeah, I'm quite open. I think we need to understand the bay venues charges currently as a baseline when we're considering everything else. But whether that happens next year or that they could then feed off what we do elsewhere into making their charges consistent the following year would be fine.
So we can certainly do that. Use the current information about their current charging,
Yeah,
but not put pressure on them to come up with alternative ideas at this stage.
yeah. Well, I think let's set the direction, and then they can feed off us potentially the following year. Yeah, Councillor Baker.
This is probably a question for us to consider to save staff time in case it's not necessary, but looking at some of our organisation's other activities, particularly around digital services, legal services and democracy services, and given some of the, what's the right word? Discourse on like social media and stuff around how we charge for bits and pieces like Lagoimas and whatnot, or there's that narrative around, we get taken to court by residents of Tauranga and then we make them do cost recoveries, and there's that debate of like, should we do that because they are residents versus it's actually ratepayers paying for those legal services, blah, blah, blah. Do we want staff to actually bring back to us how we can do better cost recovery or increase revenue in those three particular areas, considering their significance and what we do and don't charge in those spaces, plus the political lens associated to some of those activities?
Well, I guess my view, personal view again around Lagoimas is, look, if you're a resident or ratepayer of Tauranga, you're already paying for that service, and you should get some benefits in that. But if you're an out of towner just fishing for information, then potentially again there should be some charges associated with that. I think that's to me is the key thing is how do we make it fair and reward, I guess, our residents and ratepayers for what they do already contribute. It's just trying to get that balance right. It's just I guess a lot of these things come down to practicality of how can you how do you charge it, etc. But staff have some innovative ideas. Always happy to look at them. But that's the key thing for me, I think, out of all this is we've got, the people that are paying for it, deserve a discount or some sort of reward for paying for it, and those that don't contribute at all should fund more of it, however we can do that.
Yeah, but I guess, not wanting to get stuck in one particular example, but on that, our rationale for wanting to deep dive into user fees and charges in particular is to provide equity, so someone in Welcome Bay isn't paying for something that they will never use in Otomotai, let's say. We have high users of people who request Lagoimas and whatnot, and there are others, or a big majority of people who just don't care otherwise, but their rates are covering that cost. And I'm not saying that whether we should or shouldn't charge, or whether we are charging too much or not when we are, but is it worth bringing to the table so our people, and we're aware, and we can make at the end of the day, again, that political decision on whether that's fair.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that just it might also be a whole heap of hard work for staff that's not necessary. I don't know. That's what I'm asking.
I think that's what this is about. Let's look at options and make a decision on things as to how we see it. So, yeah.
Given us good direction, so we've got enough to bring back a good report for the 16th for you to make some calls. And it's not like that's the end of it. If as you're going through the user fees and charges, you think of something else you want to add in, or you start looking at something and go, actually, no, we've so no merit, we don't want to get to the conclusion, we'll stop partway through. They're all calls you can make along the way. So it's not like this is an inflexible process.
And I think this is the process we wanted to go through. We wanted to give it enough time that we can do this and really do it comprehensively so that we can make good decisions and be comfortable, and I think that's the key thing. We'll come up with some ideas, and then we go out to the community to hear the views, because this is going to be a controversial issue, so we've got to listen and figure out what the best is. So thank you everyone for your time today. Before we close, we'll just pass back to Councillor Baker to finish us off with a karakia.
Kia ora. Ke tāre watunga ki te kōrero ki te rangi ko ia tēnei te whakawātea ki nei tūturu whakamaua kia tīna haumie hui e tāe ki e.